Hi everyone, Rennie here. We love drawing from reference over here at Screen Tones, and this episode is sponsored by the amazing pose reference team at adorkastock.com. They are running the Adorkastock and Friends group poses for artists campaign over on BackerKit to make some absolutely epic looking group shots to help all of us get just the right pose for our illustrations, webcomics, or just study and level up our drawing skills. Help them make it happen over at adorkastock.com/group. Enjoy the episode.
Heck yes.
Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams come true!
Hello, and welcome.
Crispy.
Hello, and welcome to Screen Tones, where we talk anything and everything webcomics. Today, we're going to talk about building discipline and routine into your webcomic making process to make reliable and steady progress in your projects. I'm Miranda. I use she/her pronouns, and I make the webcomic Into the Swell.
And I'm Crispy. I use she/they pronouns, and I make the webcomics Ghost Junk Sickness and Lunar Blight.
And I'm Delphina. I use she/her pronouns, and I make the webcomic Zombulus.
I'm Megan. I use she/her pronouns, and I make the webcomic Sorcery Shenanigans.
Now, before we begin, this episode is not for the faint of heart. Today, we are talking to the creators that have decided they want to make a webcomic at all costs, rain or shine, snow or hail, and you are ready to put in the work. Webcomics require so many hats, and unless you're part of a team, you're wearing all of them. From editing to writing to drawing, your hat stack is very high. And discipline is what will help you stay organized, push through those less enjoyable parts of webcomicking, and ultimately help you bring your idea to fruition. So let's dive in and hear from our hosts. We'll start off with how would you describe your own routines for comic making, and what tools do you use to keep yourself on track? And we'll toss it over to Crispy to start.
I'm all over this like a hound on a pork chop. This is definitely an episode that I've been absolutely rearing to make because being part of the webcomic community, like it's all over the place. Like you're gonna have a lot of excitement, you're gonna have a lot of doubt, you're gonna have a lot of mixed feelings in this salad of comics that it is. And you do need tools, and you do need methods to get to these points and to actually create the darn thing. And like Miranda said, there is a lot of hats involved. Now, I'm definitely lucky in that I have access to working on a little bit of a team. I work with Space to create both Ghost Junk Sickness and Lunar Blight, but I still need tools for myself to create that stuff and make sure that I'm on time. Being in a team really helps because, if I screw up, that's going to hurt somebody else too. So I definitely have to be on top of that. But, even with my own work, as far as illustrations, commissions, whatever work client stuff goes, I still need a routine. I still need my tools to help with that. I've actually dedicated days during the week to do that. And it's kind of like making a routine of like a 9 to 5, whatever works for you. Late risers, early risers, whatever, but like setting a schedule for the week that you're always going to be sticking to. And as far as comics are concerned, that is my week. My week is dedicated to comics. So, Monday to Friday is like I have to get comic work done when it's on my plate. You do your work in the day, and then if you have time in the evening, I would be like, okay, 2 to 3 hours is dedicated to comic work in the evenings and stuff like that. Or if you have kind of a different scheduled day job, or if this is your day job, that's the thing that's always difficult to kind of figuring out, is where it places during the day, when you have full-time work, when you have part-time work, when you have freelance work, when you have work all over the place on top of that. Because we've described in episodes before that webcomics aren't the most profitable thing in the world. And not a lot of people,
Sadly.
yeah, not a lot of people have them as their full-time jobs. But regardless, I still think having that discipline, a routine in the day to be like, okay, what time of the day is it? It's this time of the day. I work best when it's in the evening. And so I'm always going to dedicate that to inking or whatever comic work I have to get done. And for me, that's what it works. Like I'll get day work done during the day when I can be a little bit more active in spaces and have a little bit more distractions, I'll say. But in the evenings is like, okay, this is comic work time. You know, the weekdays in the evenings, that's when the comic work gets done, and I'm not gonna get distracted by other things. So I'll throw up a video that, you know, is sea creatures, facts of the ocean. I don't know.
Oh, yes.
get,
Your
get some,
video essays.
yes. Throw those up, learn along, and you know, I get to get in the headspace because I think that's really important. Is keeping yourself in the headspace. So I use that, and I like to go into the Screen Tones Discord. They have a forum that is for video essays, and they keep it populated, and it's quite active. So I'm just like, thank you, community. This helps with my work days. So I do that, and then on top of that, behind me at all times, I have a whiteboard with my list of stuff that I need to do that week. And I like having that stuff concrete and like in my face. Concrete in a way where it's just like it's existing in the physical world because myself, I find when I make a list like digitally, I'm just like, goodbye. I can't see
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Therefore, it does not exist if I don't open the folder.
Uh-huh. I get that.
So having it on the whiteboard in big blue letters is just like, today you're recording at 8 p.m. EST. I'm just like, yep, that's happening today. And it's a reminder to put in my space. But yeah, those are the tools and my routines that I kind of stick to. Keeping with a nice weekly schedule of evenings or webcomics, and the board in the back of my head to scream at me.
Literally. And figuratively, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, those are some really good tools. I love the whiteboard idea. We have a whiteboard here that we use for things like to-do lists and stuff, and there is something to say about like having it in that physical form and in such a big form because like post-it notes are great, but they're so small.
Hmm.
Having this like giant whiteboard and very easy to read letters, usually depending on your handwriting, it's makes for really great reminders. What about you, Delphi? How would you describe your own routines, and what tools do you have?
Oh, well, now I feel like I gotta have a
Yeah, I
whiteboard.
mean all the cool kids do. So
All the cool kids do. I do have a whiteboard somewhere. I just don't have a great space for it in this particular apartment that I'm in. But it just in general, I script a scene at a time and I have the goal of 8 pages a month. I don't really work to weeks. I work to the month. So I do feel like there's days or weeks where I have more energy for pencil to the paper, inking or coloring, and then others where I have the brain space for paneling. And usually I try to pay attention to when that is because for Crispy, you're saying like in the evening. For me, it is the morning. Like first thing when I get up, that's when I always have the most energy for getting my writing and my like brain stuff done. But yeah, I have my goal 8 pages a month, and as long as it maths out to what I want for the month, it's okay for me. I do think there's a lot of power in writing that goal down and making sure at the end of the month, if I didn't meet it, like really try to be honest with where that time went if I didn't, because life happens. It's true. There's things that can push my schedule around, but I know I have a schedule that works. At the end of the day, I can always come back to that because I've done it for so long. And I think that's kind of the key to just keep yourself on track, is that you have that routine that you know always works. And so if you go on vacation or if you take a week off, you can come back to it and like, I know what I need to do. A lot of times when you're starting out, you don't know what you need to do. And that's why it's like even more important to try to keep onto the schedule on your first things, just because you're learning how you work. Um, so I think that's really important. I hear you on the digital stuff. Like I've tried apps and I tried digital calendars, and I eventually fall off of them because they disappear from my brain as soon as like the tab closes or my browser crashes or whatever. But I like to buy a spiral bound planner every year and write what I did, like scribbling a little list in each calendar box, to just reflect on what I did for the day. And something about that process helps me focus on what I haven't done yet and where all those other tasks are going to go in the upcoming days. I had a schedule. That's great. Am I going to have to hustle to meet the end of the month? If I've got some other obligation coming up because I'm going to a birthday party, like, where am I going to borrow that time? Where am I going to shift it around? And that kind of helps me make sure that I get everything that I need for the month done. Tools, like I love video essays. I love actual play podcasts. And I also have some music playlists. It really depends on what I'm in the mood for. Like there's some days where like I go like a couple months without listening to my podcasts, and then I catch up all at once, and those are pretty productive times. But I can't it, yeah, it always depends. It depends on what I'm doing, but just knowing that all of those tools are in my arsenal when I'm ready to go, like those are really powerful, and like I'm glad I've come across them over the years.
Well, I think you definitely have an advantage of having had so much time to find what works for you, so you know how to stick with it. I too like buying spiral bound planners at the beginning of the year. I have a whole drawer of them that never get used. I should probably try out your method because it actually sounds sustainable for me.
Well, what's a pain in the butt now is that they make them for like schools. So like they start in the summer, they end in the
Oh,
summer
yeah.
instead of like January through December. I'm like, I'm not in school anymore. I don't care about this
Yeah.
stuff. Rawr! But yeah, it kind of helps. And just having that there. I don't make them fancy. I'm not a fancy bullet journalist, whatever. I just scribble. And yeah, but it just kind of helps me to see like, wow, there are 3 things that I wrote that I did on Monday, and then I didn't do anything else for the rest of the week. But like actually those 3 things were pretty time consuming and pretty energy consumptive, so I'm okay because I'm looking at the rest of what I need to do, and it's not actually that
Yeah.
much. So so as long as I meet my monthly goal and I can look at it at the end of the month and say, yeah, I did what I said I was going to do,
Yeah,
that's
that's
fine.
really good. And your method, obviously you've tried and tested it, but it also seems like a great way to help you find what works for you. If you're keeping track of what you get done, maybe when you get done with it, and
Mhm.
help you kind of evaluate whether you're a morning worker or an evening worker or whatever is working for you. So those are some great tools. Megan, what about you and your routines and tools?
All right, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to agree with a little bit that, of what was said, and I'm going to be the one to give you, I guess, some of the things. Like Delphina said, I'm not a fancy bullet journal person. Hello, hi, I own a Hobonichi, and
I don't know what that is.
Nor do I.
it's a very specific brand of planner. I'm a planner girly now. I plan my week out. It helps me, not only just for my comic, but any of my artwork, figure out what I want to do in a day, like Delphina says, it kind of helps keep you on track because you know what you've done, and so you can kind of see if you have a month by month kind of overall goal, what pieces and parts you have done of the bigger goal at certain points of the month. My typical process, at least for my comics, once I'm in the midst of making them, is that my script has to be at least a chapter ahead of what I am currently drawing page-wise. I thumbnail a little bit differently than I used to, maybe a couple of years ago. My thumbnail file looks more like individual storyboard pieces. I find it just gives me a little box to kind of play in and play with breaking out of the box. And so I find that my panels are a little more varied, and using that, I kind of sit myself down and do thumbnails, and I essentially make 3 layers worth of thumbnails. And then all my pages are done in batches, because I've found that that also really helps for me. And a batch for me, since I upload a page a week, is 4 pages, and that's a month.
Okay.
I just find that it's kind of easy way to goalpost what I'm working on and see a trackable kind of path behind you of what you've been doing and where you're going. And then I do a little bit of online stuff more recently, just to sort of see more of what I have on my plate. What comic wise am I expecting of myself? What other art projects have I put myself on? What other, non-art projects have I put myself on? Just to kind of keep myself accountable for everything. I do find most calendar stuff does tend to get ignored if it's digital. The only good thing it does for me is just reminders for like repeatable tasks. But not like comic wise. For some reason, if I put a comic thing on the calendar, I'm not gonna look at it. I'm not gonna remember.
The calendar knows.
So the physical planner definitely helps. And then what I would also recommend for your routine is, if you are able to sort of work ahead, not necessarily in the same way I do, but if you can have a backlog, barring any huge life changes or life problems that come up, you should always bake in a break where you are not working on something. That should be part of your routine, just to give yourself a break, just to relax or focus on other art projects maybe that are less kind of time consuming but are still just as fun for you. I just think it's important, and I've found otherwise I will just work and work and work and work, and I will work myself into burnout.
Which we don't want that. We want to avoid burnout.
No.
But those are some really good ideas and tools. And I love how different everyone handles things. Like we have the super fancy, I don't know what kind of planner, but there's apparently a really fancy planner brand, Megan, to the whiteboard, to a standard planner. I think it goes to show that there's a lot of options. There is no one size fits all. You do need to find what works for you, but there are a lot of ways to do that. I know for me, I wish I could build a buffer more reliably, but my goal is to just create a page a week for every page I'm posting. So if I'm posting once a week, I'm making a page a week. So I'm at least breaking even. But like Megan said, I like to let myself kind of have some leeway on days that I don't designate to comics, so that if I am not in the mood to comic, I don't have to comic that day because I have my designated comic day later that week. I find if I try to force myself when I'm not in the mood, I'm not very efficient, and it just tends to not be the work I'm most proud of. So I like to work when I'm feeling those comic vibes and feeling those comic juices flowing. But let's hop to our next question of how does discipline play into your process when you've decided that you want to see a project through to the end? And how do you know when to take a break or to push through when you meet a challenge? Back to you, Crispy.
Yummy.
Yummy thoughts.
um, I always think about this one intensely because, there's like constant conversation you'll see about really wanting to make a web comic, but getting very scared and, I mean, understandably so, afraid of the amount of work that goes into it. But like, if you want a web comic, want a comic at all, you got to be the one to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to dedicate that time to do it. Like, it's not gonna get done when you take too many breaks, or you're just kind of like, I think I prefer to play games today instead, or
Yeah.
I'm gonna draw butts instead. The comic will win, it'll come some other time.
Yeah.
um there are points that you do have to be like, okay, I have to get through this. And I think a good discipline comes from making a habit out of these things and making that space. Kind of when you enter it, you're like, okay, I'm in the comic zone. One of the things that I always do to kind of like make sure I don't get distracted with my work and it's work time is that I refuse to put any kind of like video games on my work computer. And sometimes it's like people are like, oh, it'd be really fun to play like games on Steam. And I'm like, that's great. But the moment I start to download these things on my computer, I'm like, goodbye,
It's
any kind of like
mm-hmm.
progress with my projects. Because if I see that icon, I will click on it. And it's
It's a
interesting because
slippery slope.
yeah. We've talked about that with Cheska in our guest episode, where it's like when the apps are kind of there, you're gonna get distracted by them and like click on them and check them, and there are
Yeah.
things that like block them to make sure that that's not happening. But building a routine to help with that discipline and be like, okay, like I know that this is going to be this time, and when I have to actually sit down and work through it, and I know that there is a siren call of like, but I I'm so bored, I don't want to do this part. But it's like, well, you can't keep putting it off. It's not fair to future self to keep doing this and to prolong it, and
Mm-hmm.
to like, if it is boring, if it is something that feels unfulfilling, maybe it's time to reflect. Like, maybe the process part is something I'm not jiving with. Does it need to exist? Do I need to do thumbnails this certain way, or can I make it more exciting and engaging?
Mm-hmm.
Can I make things more enticing to kind of get into? Is something is good to consider. And I think, I resonate a lot with Delphina because we both have very long we have very long webcomics. Um
Long webcomic archive, high five.
um and we've been working on them for over 10 years, and so we found what works. We found getting XYZ done. And I like that Meg talked about, not getting into pages until it was scripted, at least a chapter ahead. Like, that's good, and that's good to have as a discipline, to be like, we're not getting to go and get distracted unless we have these things done. And you do have to be a little hard on yourself, not in a gonna punish myself way, but the thing is if you want these things to be done, you do have to stick to them. You do have to be like, well, I know everybody's having fun at the pizza party, dinosaur slope, awesome jumping jamboree, but I might have to just skip out on that because I goofed up and I'm not doing my script like I said I should. I know it will sound like, oh, it's such a slog and it's just a hobby. Yes. But I feel like we also have to put work into that for it to happen too. And like, I create this stuff because I love comics and I like the process of it because I think you have to like the process. So it took a while to figure out what worked. It took a while to discover that process and to make a discipline, or to discipline myself to get into the habit of creating.
Mhm.
And that's just it. I will say, our breaks, because I work on it with my sister, we do take breaks between each chapter. Right now, we're trying to finish the rest of Ghost Junk, so it's a little like, woo, we're going in the fast lane. But our regular schedule, and this will come back on normal after we finish Ghost Junk off. But after we finish a chapter, so we'll push through, we'll do the stages of scripting, thumbnailing, drawing, inking, toning, lettering, and go back and forth with that. But we'll finish the chapter, say it's 40 to 60 pages, and then we'll have like maybe a couple of months off from creating. The buffer is there, it's huge, it's made. And that gives us a lot of time to just work on other projects, revitalize, and then it's like, okay, the month of no comic is done, and now we have to get back into rebuilding the buffer. And that's how we work. We work in giant bulk, and we can do that just because there's two of us. But we do it in a huge chapter bulk. We do that, and then it gives us time to take a break because, like Meg said, establishing a break is very necessary for
Mhm.
burned out. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's me.
that's really great. I can't even fathom what it would be like having a month-long buffer, like, or a month's worth of work as a anyway. It's very impressive, but you're so right that like it is a hobby for most of us, but there's no webcomic fairy that's just going to come wave a wand and do all your inks for you if that's
Yeah.
what you don't like. Like you have to do all of the parts. If you've made it this far and you're making a webcomic, you did it because you had some inkling of what goes into webcomicking, and you have to do it. No one else is going to do it for you. Or I mean, you can always try to find a team and like balance it out if like you really really don't want to do something. But
Mm-hmm.
you do have to just suck it up sometime if you want it to be created,
Yeah.
even if the only things you're getting is from yourself.
Yeah.
What about you, Delphi?
I mean, hold on, because I'm still trying to find that webcomic fairy. I want to talk to her.
I have her hostage.
No.
Oh
Yeah,
no,
we've been doing some
fair.
planning, but I'll send her your way.
Hey, you gotta
I'll send
share.
her your way when
Share
I'm
the
done.
webcomic fairy.
Okay, well, I do have a confession to make because when Crispy was talking about having the video game there taunting you to click the icon, like that was a big thing for me. I when before I started Zombulus, I had a really big competitor for my time, and that was World of
Dun
Warcraft.
dun
I was
dun.
I was level 40. I was in a raiding guild with my troll shaman. And there were several nights a week where I had the schedule to play the game with my raiding guild. And like MMOs are fun. You can make a lot of friends, but they can also take up so much energy, which is what I was finding in my life. So I sort of made the call to stop that so I could reclaim that energy. That was a really important step to me because like as much as you schedule, as much as you plan, you do have to make sure you have the energy to go through with what you want to, or else you are going to lead to burnout. Just kind of making that call for what was in my life that was important to me, and comics were important to me, so more important than the video games.
Mhm.
But anyway, um and I also feel like we're going to have another episode about burnout, and when it's bad to like push through it,
Mhm.
but you don't push through when your conditions are wearing you down. You also don't quit. You sit down and you figure out how to change your conditions to something that helps you continue sustainably, because I don't know, like I if I don't get things done, if I'm stressed out and I just like full stop, I have a lot of guilt when I'm not moving forward. Taking a break and never touching my comic doesn't help with the fact that I still feel behind and I still feel like I'm not making progress. So I do need at least a plan in place, even if I'm just taking a week to just play video games or whatever, I need to know that I'm coming back from that week and this is what I'm doing. Or one thing that I do every year is at the end of the chapter, I take a month off, and usually that hits around December. I try to make it work around December because everybody's busy with holiday stuff anyway, so they're not as likely to care, and everybody kind of understands when you say, hey, I have other obligations during the holiday months, so I'm gonna take this time off. But I don't take it off. I build my buffer. I work on my script. I do everything I can to prepare myself so that the next year is I'm starting off on the right foot and I don't feel like I'm behind.
Mhm.
So that's kind of my attitude toward it. And I'm also going to say that when you start a comic, there are some things to figure out, but it's really exciting because you're putting your characters on the board, you're establishing your setting, you're doing a lot of things for the first time, and you kind of have this honeymoon
Mhm.
period. But when I hit the middle of the comic, I had everything established and had to answer a lot of what next questions. And those were hard. And I wanted to seek out distractions because it was so hard. And that's where having that experience and having it be second nature to work on this stuff was great, because that's what discipline is for me, just training your body like exercise so you're not huffing and puffing when the hill gets steeper. So
Oh, yeah.
that can come from a few different ways. If you have a behemoth of a comic like me and you're working on it for 14 years, yeah, you're going to have time along the way to learn your process. But you can also do smaller projects. You can kind of get a sense of how you work from those too. And there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it to get to this understanding of yourself and your energy and build those muscles up, build that stamina up. That's what discipline is for me.
Mhm. That's really good. What about you, Meg?
So part of it is like everybody's saying, if it's your first comic, it's a lot of learning. You're gonna figure out how you work and how your comic works as well. Sometimes processes are different comic by comic. And you're just gonna, at first, you're gonna have to kind of be gentle with yourself, but you can't be too gentle because you're trying to develop a little bit of discipline, trying to teach yourself the, like we've said, the difference between if you just need a little bit of a break, uh, or if it's maybe I need a little bit longer of a break, I didn't notice I was in burnout, or uh, it's really nothing and I just need to push through. And for me, that's why I bake in breaks into my comic making schedule, because it's a lot easier for me. And I ain't saying it's perfect. It's just a lot easier for me to see the difference more often than not as to which one that is. If I need a break, it's usually because I've been working on either scripting or thumbnailing for a while, and I'm just kind of stuck. Your tires are kind of spinning in the mud, not really going anywhere, and so you nothing kind of sticks around, and so I just have to leave it alone for a couple of days, and as long as that's all it is, I come back in a couple of days, start working on whatever it was again. Uh, and sometimes that little bit of a break kind of gives you a new look at what you're working on, and is just enough for you to kind of figure out whatever problem you had or come with a new way to change it so that it does start working
Mhm.
for you. Because like I I have to keep saying I am very vibes based when I work on art. And so if something isn't working, I'm not vibing with it. And so I just have to change the vibes until they feel right. Um and then for me, when I need to push through, it's a lot different. It's more like sometimes you sit down to work on something, and for whatever reason, you just have the thought of, I don't really want to work on this. I just really don't wanna. And if it's the first time I'm sitting down and that's the thought I'm getting, sometimes I might swap to a different part of the process, or you just have to look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself you're being a big baby and work on it anyway.
So have the whiteboard
So-
behind you, the mirror in front of you.
Yes. The whiteboard with your path to comics behind you, mirror in the front so you can look at yourself and go, "Hey, brain, you're being a big baby today. You're making things harder than we need it to be. This is fine. There's nothing wrong. We can do this."
And conveniently, you would also see the whiteboard in the mirror as you're talking to yourself, and therefore remind yourself and put yourself in a cycle of
Mhm.
yes, this is my plan. I forgot about it because it was in the back of my head,
Literally.
literally and figuratively. Those are some really good things. And I like what you said about skipping to a different part of the process because, yes, there are a ton of hats in webcomics, and that has its pain points, but it's also a great thing because if you're if you're dying because you're thumbnailing and you can't do any more thumbnails, you have so many other parts of the process you can jump to. You can script, you can ink, you can color. I know for me, I feel a lot of different moods and kind of vibes based on oh, I'm feeling really creative today. I think I could do some really good work scripting. It's still comic work, it still counts, and you're still moving forward with your story. But you're not doing whatever it was that you were sick of. So uh taking a break doesn't always mean stopping completely. You can take a break of like take a break from one part of the process to another. um i I think that's one of the best things about webcomics is there's a lot to it. It's also one of the worst things, but everything's a double-edged sword. um and I think it's uh Delphi mentioned, when you take your break at the end of a chapter, you're not stopping, you're just kind of working in the background, building up your buffer, writing, scripting, and you're still working on your comic. You're just not posting it actively. And I think that's another huge thing that can be kind of defined as a break. You can pause your posting schedule and give yourself time to catch up because sometimes the pressure of actively posting, it can get a little overwhelming if you don't have a buffer, if you didn't plan ahead and you're kind of winging it a little too much. So don't be afraid to post less frequently or adjust your uh, frequency, or even just take a hiatus and do those behind the scene things so you can catch up and kind of more thoroughly plan and feel better about what you're working on. Don't be afraid to take a break, but you definitely need to gauge kind of where you're at when you decide to do that, and give yourself a talking to, Megan style, if you are just being a baby about it. And that kind of brings us to, what is your advice to someone who can't seem to stick to a project and wants to try to form a more disciplined approach for whatever they're working on? We'll start with you, Crispy.
That's a big question.
Lots of layers for your onions.
um so I think the number one thing that I want to say about this question is we're going to bring that mirror back. And really reflect on what your goals are for the entire thing. Like, is the webcomic for you? Is the webcomic because your friends are doing webcomics? Is the webcomics because you want to get rich fast? Like, that's really silly. um, but really reflect on why are we here? Like, what's going on? Why are we making a webcomic? And I find that, like, I like to do that and bug my friends a lot when I'm just like, having thoughts about webcomics. What are they? What is the purpose of them? Why am I doing this at all? And I think like having conversations, whether they go like, to a positive angle or like a more like, humbling negative one, I know at the end of the day, after each of those conversations, it always circles back to, well, because I'm just possessed with the need to make comics. I make comics because that is what I need to do. It's just something that drives me, something that always has just made me go forward with these decisions. I've done comics like ever since I could attempt to draw them on my crappy little lined paper. And I've just always been driven by the medium and the way that they've been told. And my advice definitely comes down to really understanding what the purpose is. And if it's something that you really, really want to do, it is something that possesses you. I think that figuring out and laying each of the pieces down with your process, because it will change. I know people who have different types of process, like ways that they've figured out how to do the comic, and it's always interesting, and it's different with the steps that they choose. You don't have to do inking. Dear God, do not do inking if you hate it. I see so many people say how much they hate inking, and I'm just like, uh, guys, you don't have to do it. You could find another way to make this comic happen and to make it work. My first comics were pencil, so they happened. You can find a different medium. That means, workshop. Take some time to be like, okay, I hate inks. Like, how are we going to push through this? Or I hate thumbnailing. How are we going to push through that? And, really pinpoint those things that make you not want to engage with it. But if it's an overall thing, if it is someone who cannot stick to a project because the idea of the project is huge, but you still really want to, that's a big evaluation for the self. That's a big ask for yourself if you don't want to stick to something like that. So I think that there's going to be a lot of, introspection. There's going to be a lot of
Mm-hmm.
self-reflection that you're going to have to do to either see if you can make it work, discipline, and routine, and drop some things that are quote unquote distracting. Maybe it is time that if you really wanted a webcomic, maybe it's time to just put WoW on hold for a little moment and just be like, okay, I need to unsub because I want this to happen. And, you will have to sacrifice some things to get this done because it is a lot of work. And I want to take this moment to really appreciate the amount of work that people put into webcomics. They're something that is free to read. A majority of the pieces are. And there is so much stuff, so much thought, love, and time that goes into it. So it's a big ask for you to go into it. And I think that you really have to be prepared for that. The disappointment comes with it too if you can't make it work. But it's a huge undertaking. So
Mm-hmm.
my advice is to just really figure out if this is what you want. And if it is, well, come join our Discord server. Yeah, prepare the hats.
Join the
'Cause
Discord. We have hats.
yes, it's a lot of work, but people are willing to help. There's a lot of resources out there and people who want to help out. So
I
come
love,
join us.
yeah, yes, we have a Discord, which most of you should know. If you don't, we do. Now you know. But you're right in that there are so many webcomics out there, and like because of that, there's so many resources for making webcomics. Like I love watching and like little insights into creators' processes because I love to see how differently everyone does. I love to see the different stages of the art, how the scripting happens. It fascinates me, and I love it. It's a great source of ideas, and communities like that, like the Screen Tones Discord and just webcomic webcomics in general. Like, there's so many different ways to do it. No one does it the same way, and it's like an infinite pool of ideas if you're feeling like your approach is not working for you.
Mhm.
And I definitely think you need to make sure that your project is the project that you're passionate about and you love, because that's going to keep you going when the going gets tough.
Mhm.
What about you, Delphi? What are your advice tidbits?
Oh gosh, I feel this so hard about the preconceived notions of what tools professional comic makers have to use, what process they have to use. And especially as baby Delphi, who had a limited internet experience compared to what the internet is today, there weren't like YouTube process things that I could watch other people. So I just kind of had to think, like, do I need a special inking pen? Do I need the specific deleter template from Japan if I want to do manga? Or, oh no, I don't know how to use this thing. Does that mean I have to struggle with it forever? And the answer is no. The answer is let it go. Listen to other creators' process and see what works for your style. Listen to yourself. There's no wrong way to make comics unless you are literally murdering people and using their blood as your ink. Like, that is not. Otherwise, the you could do whatever you want to, and listening to yourself about what that process looks like for you is super important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another thing that really helped me when I was first starting out, before I started Zombulus, I did a couple of years of NaNoMongo on LiveJournal, which was this yearly NaNoWriMo style challenge to do 30 comic pages and in 30 days. And that was a great way to find a routine that did not work for sustainable long-term webcomic creation. That was way too much. I didn't get very far in whatever I was doing, and it was just 1 month out of the entire year. So I wasn't forming the habit as a new comic maker. I was just stressing myself out for the month. But it did give me some starts of comics that I could build on, and that eventually became my comic Zombulus. And I think that's the value of an activity like that. That's the end goal of an activity like that, getting rid of the blank page and giving yourself a draft of something to clean up. That can be really helpful to establish that momentum and make sure that you have something to work with. You're not just starting from zero, because it's hard to just say, well, okay, tomorrow is the day where I am going to draw a page a week, and I better come up with my idea and I better do it, and this is my resolve. That's a way to set yourself up for failure. So just make sure that you do a little bit of preparing, not don't over prepare, don't sit in your planning jail for 4 years trying to plan out every little thing. Eventually you do have to get started, but I personally, with my style, I feel like that activity of getting rid of my blank page was something that helped me and might help you. um and again, looking for other places where your energy is going. I mentioned, wow, that was a big thing for me. But there are also just genuinely times in my life where things are upside down, family, work, whatever. And I really truly don't have the energy to give to comics. And those times feel different to me than times when I'm just avoiding the story because I'm at a part that's difficult for me. So learning more about yourself and learning when to recognize that is extremely helpful. Learning how to finish a project and know your energy levels can only help you figure out, like, okay, I'm doing my normal thing and it normally works, and it always works, but this time it's not working. This month it's not. And so that's my cue to say, hey, there's something else going on in my life, and I'm gonna be I am gonna forgive myself for that, but I know that that's almost kind of comforting to me, because I know when that thing is over, I'm going to come back from that period of my life with a good start, because I had those good habits, because I already had a system that worked for me, and I know I can get it to work again. And after years and years of doing this, you come to understand yourself in that way. So that's just, it's something to look forward to. I think it's really awesome to, like, just look back on a lot of things that you've done and said, hey, I got a lot of things done. I really found a process that worked for me, and I'm super proud of myself for that. So so that's one of the things. Just, like, give that to yourself. Give yourself that chance to really make something that you've always wanted to make.
Mm-hmm. Take chances, get messy, and planning jail is real. It is across the street from reboot hell. And sometimes the only way out of it is you just have to put something on paper or tablet, whatever your medium is. Um, it's not going to start itself. And I love that you pointed out Nano Mongo.
We never
I
figured
don't
out
know
the pronunciation.
but like that being a tool to force you to get stuff out into the world. I feel like that's one of the hardest parts of starting a comic sometimes, is just starting it. Like, you can have all these ideas, you can have a script formed, you can have an outline, but it's until you actually start it and get that momentum going, it's like it's just an idea. So you need to put the effort in and the discipline in to bring it to life. I know Meg is just, like, chomping at the bit for this question. So Meg, give us your thoughts. Go.
Okay. I have to give a couple disclaimers now. One, I'm probably going to repeat some things that we've already said, and I apologize. But this is my soapbox that I wrote out yesterday night, so you're going to have to listen to me say it. Not really. You could close the podcast or skip ahead if you wanted to, but please.
Nope, you're here. You have to stay.
Please listen to my soapbox. And two, I'm probably going to sound a lot meaner than I usually do, and I'm not really going to apologize.
Hell
for that.
yeah, corruption
I'm not
arc.
really sorry.
Woo!
This is a dose of tough love for you. I'm not telling you these somewhat mean things because I want you to fail, and I think you suck. It's because I want you to make your comic, and I want you to enjoy it, and I want you to figure out whether or not that works for you. And you're gonna have to hear some tough things from me. So I'm gonna jump into it. We've probably harped on it many an episode. And I know we've done it this episode. Comic making is hard. It's a lot of hats. Don't underestimate it. And I'm gonna repeat it. Do not underestimate how much energy and time and effort making a comic makes. It is not always a walk in the park. Some things will be. You will have those walk in the park moments. But they will not always be there. There will be points where you need a break. And that's normal. And if you really want to tell your little story with your wonderful characters and your great plot, then you're going to have to push through it. You're going to have to figure out what is and isn't working for you in your process. You're going to have to see, what about it do you not like doing? Can you change it so you do like it? If not, you're just going to have to accept that that's a part of the process. That's a hat you have to wear you don't enjoy doing. You're going to have to put that hat on, and it's not going to be fun. But it's part of your process if you can't get rid of it. You aren't going to love every part of making your comic. So sometimes that's just how it is, and you're going to have to be okay with it. Mm-hmm. But if it's something story-based or a decision maybe you've made about a character, maybe you can change it. Maybe there's something different that you could make it to where it would be more enjoyable for you. But if you change different things about your comic or your process, and nothing seems to make you like the process of making your comic or that story in particular any more than you did before, then you need to go back to the drawing board and come up with another idea. Maybe just put that on the back burner for 5-10 years from now when you finish the next comic idea. Or, and this is probably going to sound really mean, you just like the idea of making a comic. And sometimes, as we've said, it's hard to fit comic making into your life, and you're going to have to scramble your current schedule around to figure out where you can place it. What day of the week works for you, what time of the day works for you. Or maybe, like Delphina, you need to cut out WoW or another video game you spend a lot of time on to kind of reclaim that time for something new. An idea I had last night while I was writing all of this is maybe you need to take a moment, if you're a very visual person like myself, and write it down on a piece of paper and sort it into 3 different categories. Sort it into fun, comic, and need to do. Need to do just as like errands, chores, apartment upkeep, stuff like that. Stuff that isn't comic related, but it's important. Getting that stuff done means that you don't live in a pigsty and you're taking care of yourself. It helps you with your comic process. It's just not immediate. And then you got to take a look at your list. And maybe the fun stuff you're doing is a lot more than your comic work stuff. And so you're going to have to start tossing some things out of your fun stuff. Or maybe whatever day you're sort of basing these columns off of, your necessary things to do column outweighs both of those. And that's not bad. Those are things you got to get done. There's really, only so much you can do about that. But maybe that day is not good for trying to work on your comic.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you've got a lot of reoccurring tasks on, say, Wednesdays. And trying to fit in comic work on that day just means that you feel really stretched thin, really stressed out, and you don't get a lot done. Instead, what I like to do, and I'm starting to realize I think I do this in my head in the background. With my day job, I don't really have time, or a lot of it, on my day job days to do comic work outside of my day job. And so I don't tend to write down in my planner, we're gonna thumbnail on Monday after we get home at 6:30 p.m. PST. Because I realize I'm going to be exhausted, I'm going to be tired, and that may not be possible. And maybe some days you do randomly have time for that, and it's like a little extra, like, congrats, you got a little extra time spent on your comic this week. But don't make it an expectation. Your expectation for the work you get done, as we've said, should be sustainable. You shouldn't be asking too much of yourself in the comic making process because it's already so much. Don't make it harder than it needs to be on yourself.
For sure.
Like we've said, you obviously won't learn this right off the bat. Comic making process is a very long time. The whole thing, process, and the comic itself is a learning process, both about the comic and yourself. A good start is to make sure you have those reasonable expectations so you can develop your discipline. You shouldn't set them so low that they're easily obtainable and you get things done really fast, but you're kind of slow on the output. But it should stretch you a little bit so that you can kind of see how much you can get done and learn whether or not you're asking too much of yourself. And maybe just maybe when you come up with those base expectations, and you might want some people to kind of throw them at and ask, hey, do you think I might be asking too much of myself? I want to double check, make sure that I'm not asking too much. You could always hop in our Discord. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Ask some nice, helpful, friendly folks if what you're expecting from yourself is a little too much. You know? And then, like I've said, it's a process. From there on, you'll just kind of remove expectations or add them as you're growing.
Most definitely. I'm getting a theme that I didn't anticipate from this episode of like learning about yourself, and kind of a lot of introspection that comes with being a webcomic creator. And I knew that was a thing, but it keeps coming up in everyone's answers, and it's been really interesting to hear how much you need to know about yourself to understand your process of making webcomics. So I think that's really interesting. All right, we've had such good conversation about discipline, and it's kind of a heavy topic as far as our episodes go. Do you guys have any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners about discipline and how it applies to webcomics?
All right, so part 2. Not joking. So, I think with all of this, there are some hard pills to swallow. Meg said kind of like the I want to call it the unspeakable truth with a lot of like creative endeavors. It's not just a webcomic thing, but like the idea of having this endeavor done, but being scared of the amount of work. I get that. Oh my god. Every time I'm just like, I want to learn Blender so I can make 3D models. I always say that, but I never dedicate the time to learn Blender and to understand it so I can make those 3D models. But that's the thing, and the webcomic medium is the same thing. It's just I really like the idea of webcomics, and you got to choose if you're going to get into that driver's seat to start making them. And as you start the engines and whatnot and start that stuff, you're going to realize, is this for me? And I admit, I opened Blender. I didn't know what the heck was going on. I looked at tutorials. I was like, yep, I'll I'll work on getting someone else to do this for me.
At least you're honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And you tried.
That's the thing. I tried, I was honest. I found it wasn't for me. But by gosh,
But
did
you
I
also
try.
didn't go.
And I think that's important for webcomics. You could try, you could see if it's for you. If it is and you really want it to work, like, hey baby, this is the episode for it.
But you also didn't go to the Blender like gift shop and buy the hat and buy the I'm a Blender like t-shirt. Like that's the thing too. Like you can't like I feel like some people do like the idea of it, but when you put in the work, that's a little different, and yeah, it's worth doing. So if you want the comic, make the comic.
Mhm.
Yes. Make the comic. It's not going to make itself, but make sure it's something that you want. Because at the end of the day, you're the one that has to make it, and if you don't love it, it's probably not going to happen. So that is a barbecue chicken wrap.
Ooh.
That sounds really good right now.
Tasty.
And we are disciplined, and oh my gosh, wow. And that is a barbecue chicken wrap. Thank you so much for listening. I've been your host, Miranda, and you can check out my work at mirandacakes.art.
And I'm Crispy. You can check my work at ghostjunksickness.com and lunarblight.com.
And I've been Delphina. You can check out my comic Somnolus at somnolus.com.
we've probably made this joke before, but I'm going to do it again. I have been, and will be Megan. And you can find my work at sorceryshenanigans.com.
Now, you know what's something I really want to do is when this episode goes up, I need to show my sheep that I made in Blender.
Oh,
Yes,
I've seen so many.
I have half a dome.
Thank you for listening to Screen Tones, a webcomic podcast. Want to know some other ways to support us? Check out our Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/screentonescast, where your support will help us create more episodes, reach cool extra bonus goals, and keep us talking about anything and everything webcomics. You can also find us on Tumblr, Instagram, and our Discord server. Thank you so much for listening, sharing, rating, and supporting, and we'll see you next time.